Hello everyone, my name is Jim Marshall and I'm the Director of Public Safety for the City of Marshall. Today I'm here to present to you some information regarding our Predatory Offender Release Program notification meeting and the release of an individual into our community. Minnesota law outlines some of the guidelines that we have to follow and the information that is released and how that is done. In past years, we've had several community notification meetings that we've done in person. This, however, is our first recorded meeting done, and it's because of COVID-19 concerns and the current Minnesota governor's executive order that's in place. Today we have with us several individuals that's going to share some information regarding the POR program, the expectations of the individual that's being released, and the oversight that's going to be provided to that individual. I want to just assure our community that the Marshall Police Department will do everything to provide for your safety and your protection. Part of that process is to inform you and to make you aware of things that's happening within our community. And part of it is also to encourage you to reach out to us and address any concerns or questions that you may have. We are here to help, and we are here to make Marshall a better and safer community to live. I'm going to turn this over to Brad, who is part of the Community Notification Education Program, and I'm going to turn it over to him for some comments.
Well, hello and thank you for taking the time to review this important information. As the chief said, I am Brad Vandervet with the Minnesota Department of Corrections, and I'm with the Risk Assessment and Community Notification Unit. And I'm here today to share with you some important information, not only about the individual you're here to learn about specifically, but about the state's risk management system as a whole. So with meetings like this, where I tend to structure it is in three distinct parts. I want to give you some foundational background information to build upon whatever knowledge is existing in the community already about this important topic. And then I'm going to use that information as an overlay as we get into the specific stuff about the man you're here to learn about, and then on into some resources to assist you in applying this information effectively in those safety plans. So without further ado, I think the best part, or the best way to really start this conversation off, is with what we already know as a community and as a society. And that is that those who engage in this type of harm, sexual harm, exist. They've existed. And so the real question tends to come down to, what is it we're doing as a state, as counties, as cities, and communities to address those who we've identified, who we've caught and found out? One of those components of that state risk management system in addressing these individuals came online in 1991. And that is the Predatory Offender Registry, or POR. The registry is administered by the state's Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, and it collects and maintains a great deal of data about those individuals that are subject to registration. Information like their primary address. That also would include secondary addresses or places they may frequent often. They also have to notify law enforcement of their employment, and that's all employment they have. If they operate a motor vehicle for that employer, they must also register that with law enforcement. If they're attending any kind of school, they must register that information, along with vehicles that they themselves either use, own, or possess. So even the old broken down junker in the backyard needs to be known to law enforcement. Other components of the registry include things like their phone numbers and any properties they may rent, like storage lockers. Now, the law established indicates or structures it such that the information collected and maintained on the registry is private data. And as such, it is for law enforcement purposes only. So the next question that often will come up when I start to talk about the registry is, who then is required to register? And in Minnesota, the registry began in the 90s focusing on sex offenders, and it was known as the Sex Offender Registry. But as the years went on, the state really saw the benefit for law enforcement in having a robust registry for those individuals who present a particular risk. And they've included and broadened that scope now to add in other non-sex related crimes, such as kidnapping and false imprisonment. And this is why some of you may recall there was that name change from the Sex Offender Registry to the Predatory Offender Registry. And an easy way to keep it straight in your mind is this. All sex offenders are registered predatory offenders, while not all registered predatory offenders are sex offenders. So as you're thinking about the scope of it, just use that to keep it straight in your mind. Like I said, with the registry, the information is predominantly for law enforcement purposes only. However, for meetings like today, I'm able to take kind of a 30,000-foot flyover view and a snapshot of what's going on in and around communities. And the way I like to start to share this information is by putting in your mind an analogy of a funnel. And think of the wide end of the funnel as that very entry point for this type of criminal conduct and behavior. And what we know from the research and data that is available, and there's a robust amount of data available, is that of those sex offense crimes that occur in communities day after day, only a fraction of them will ever go on to be reported to law enforcement. And the funnel begins to narrow. Of those that do get reported to law enforcement, only a portion of those may go on to be charged out formally. And the funnel narrows further. Of those charged out formally, only a portion of those may go on to receive sentences. And of those sentenced, only a portion of those individuals may go on to cross the threshold of a prison. And you'll see why that's a unique distinction. So as you're thinking about this information that you're receiving today, think about it in a broad context. As much as we're focusing on one individual, I also want your awareness broadened. So as you look at my information here, you'll see from the first of the year, we had approximately 18,798 registered predatory offenders in the state of Minnesota. And as of the 3rd, you can see within communities around here, Lyon County had 61 registered predatory offenders residing within its boundaries. And that would include those registrants who have no risk level assigned, levels 1, levels 2, and level 3. And in fact, on the right-hand side of my slide here, you'll see the littler number 1. That is one current registrant that is subject to broad public notification. So either a level 3 individual or somebody who had been civilly committed. If you narrow that scope further, you can look at Marshall proper, and currently, or at least as of the 3rd, and know that these numbers are dynamic and they fluctuate and change with some regularity as these individuals do move. But as of the 3rd, there were 42 registrants residing in Marshall proper, one of whom is that registrant subject to broad public notification. You can look around neighboring communities and you'll see that every community around has registrants within its boundaries. But for example, if you were to look at Redwood County or Yellow Medicine counties right now, if you were to go on to the state's public registrant search function and look for those subject to broad public notification within those two communities, you would see none. But you can see again with that broad awareness component just how important it is, because that's not actually the case. While there may be no registrant subject to broad public notification within their boundaries living there, there's certainly registrants residing there. And more often than not, there are registrants crossing their boundaries day in and day out for all manner of reasons. So again, broad awareness is the key with this information. Another component of the state's risk management system that I want to talk about with you today is the Community Notification Act. And this component came online in 1997 and is founded on the knowledge and research data that shows that a well-informed community is in fact a safer community. And it is the reason we are here today and able to share with you this important information. And so the Department of Corrections and for the community at large, we like to really thank the Marshall Police Department and its efforts to ensure that this information reaches the broadest amount of people possible. And so since the Community Notification Act is the reason we are here talking today, it's worth going into further detail about how it works and functions. So the Community Notification Act, as you saw from my earlier slide, does not apply to all registered predatory offenders. It in fact only applies to those who have crossed the threshold of prison, not county jail, but state prison. That can be any state in the union to include U.S. territories, military prisons, and federal prisons as well. And so those individuals that I showed earlier who have no risk level assigned means that they have not crossed the threshold of prison, or they were convicted as juvenile offenders. In either event, they are not subject to risk level assessment and assignment. So when it comes to assessing and assigning risk and then providing notification, the next question that will often come up is, well, then who does what? Well, the way the Community Notification Act is structured is that the Minnesota Department of Corrections is tasked with the assessment of and assignment of the risk levels. And that is done through the End of Confinement Review Committee, the ECRC. This process takes place 90 days or earlier prior to the registrant's release into the community, their initial release into the community. And it takes into account a broad array of data that's been pulled from their entire history and documentation available. And it's run through a risk assessment tool known as the MinSOST, or the Minnesota Sex Offender Screening Tool. And the MinSOST is a homegrown research tool that began, this research and information and data that supports this tool, began in the early 90s when all of these laws were starting to come online. And the initial study ended in the early 2000s, covering the course of a decade. And then a follow-up study ended in 2012. And the initial study followed over 3,166 known sex offenders into the community over that decade at their release. And it marked their successes and it marked their failures. And this is what the researchers were able then to create these predictive risk factors based on the research from this study. So as I go forward here today and I talk about risk levels of 1, 2, and 3, know that I'm speaking specifically to that study. And so when I say an individual is a level 1, I'm saying they have a lower amount of predictive risk factors as compared to that peer group. If I say they're a level 2, they have a moderate amount of those known predictive risk factors. And if I say a level 3, they have a higher amount of those known predictive risk factors. Now, a couple things about risk assessment tools that are important to understand as we go forward. First and foremost, no risk assessment tool is capable of predicting the future. And number 2, risk assessment tools are of great value to our colleagues in law enforcement and in the supervision fields to implement their risk mitigation tools and procedures. And that's the name of the game, because the other component is to remember that risk is dynamic. It's constantly changing and fluctuating. So once risk level's been assessed and a risk assessment's arrived at a level of 1, 2, or 3, and that assignment gets made, then the handoff goes to law enforcement. And law enforcement's responsibility with the Community Notification Act is to provide notification within the scope of that risk level. For those assigned risk level 1, law enforcement will provide notification to other law enforcement agencies or entities. They'll provide notification to victims of or witnesses to the offense if they've chosen to be notified, if they've requested that enhanced notification piece. And they'll also provide notification to immediate adult household members living in the home with that individual. And that is the scope of a level 1 notification. A level 2 notification builds upon those individuals and entities we just mentioned with a level 1, and it includes other entities and individuals. Now, often people think that a level 2 is schools and daycares get notified. And while that may very well be true, it's not always the case. So think, for example, in a scenario like this. Law enforcement receives a dossier from the Risk Assessment Community Notification Unit on a level 2 entering the community, and they look through this information and determine that this particular individual focuses their conduct and behavior on adult female victims at social gatherings. Think places like bars or concert venues or things like that. That's been their pattern of conduct. In that scenario, law enforcement may determine that it is of no greater benefit to inform, say, a daycare whose primary clientele are children birth to school age. Instead, they may focus their notification on this individual on bar proprietors, bar owners, or concert venue security staff in that regard. On the flip side of that scenario, let's say law enforcement is made aware of a level 2 who's entered the community or coming into the community, and they've determined that this individual focuses their offending behavior and conduct on unaccompanied minors. Think teens in transit from school or to after-school activities or to home after the day is done. And law enforcement knows of a local hotspot within the community where teens like to congregate and hang out and socialize. Law enforcement in that scenario may very well take that level 2 notification to the proprietor of that teen hotspot and provide them with that additional information and say something to the effect of, if you see this individual here loitering, hanging out, or establishing and creating relationships, give us a call and let us know. We'd like to come out and talk with him and find out more about what he's up to. So that's the nuance of a level 2 notification. And then a level 3 notification, for those who have that higher amount of predictive risk factors, law enforcement will then go into broad public notification. And that notification takes on many different formats and forms. It really comes down to how local law enforcement communicates best with its community and its citizens. And again, we thank and recognize the Marshall PD and its efforts today to get this out to as many of you as possible. So, given that this research was conducted by the State Department of Corrections and is what really informs our risk assignments, it's worth going into a little bit more data for you so you know how to parcel out this information and use it and implement it effectively into those family and community safety planning efforts. So at that narrowest end of that funnel, as we've been talking about this analogy going forward, lies those individuals that cross the threshold. Now, year after year, the number of registrants crossing into prisons does change and fluctuate. However, the risk level assignment and breakdown stays very static. Year after year, we see that the average risk level assessments and assignments fall very much in this pattern, where 15% are assessed and assigned that risk level 3, thereby being that group that is subject to broad public notification. So you can see just that it's the narrowest amount that we're getting to talk about. But it's so important to understand them because in doing so, we understand the others. As of the 3rd, there were 446 individual registrants subject to broad public notification in the different communities throughout the state of Minnesota. And you know as well as I know that where their head hits the pillow at night, where they live, is not where they're at their highest potential risk. It's where these individuals spend their waking hours where we really need our highest level of awareness. And we know that they cross lines for all manner of reasons, like we talked about earlier, for work purposes, to visit family, friends, or acquaintances, for recreation, and so on, to go to receive treatment in different communities. We know they exist broader than just where their head hits the pillow. So again, that broad awareness is so, so critical. Other information I really want to share with you as you're thinking about how to implement this into those safety plans is the relationships between those who commit this kind of harm and those who they hurt. And you'll see here from my data that the majority of those engaging in this kind of harm through our research study and through this study, which was actually conducted through the U.S. Department of Justice. And I like to use this one because it shows some cross comparison from the different kinds of studies that have been conducted. But the numbers really do equal about the same. The majority are those who have a relationship or a knowing to the people they hurt, either because they're direct family member or they are somehow an acquaintance, someone that was given a position of trust or who had earned a position of trust. You'll see from the information here that stranger group falls into that 7% category. And this is the group we as a community tend to really latch onto most, because when we think about family members and acquaintances, we think, okay, we have a lot of control here. And the state and our police departments and sheriff's departments work very hard to make sure we have the tools so we can properly vet the people coming into our families' lives. So it's really the stranger component that's the most out of our or beyond our direct control. So it's worth breaking down a little bit further what that really comes down to. Know that the research study that came up with this information had to create a cutoff for what is a relationship. And the determination was made that it had to show throughout their research, that they had to be able to show through the documentation available, that a relationship existed, a knowing existed between the offender and the victim of more than 24 hours. This was your cutoff. And so inevitably what you would find falling into the stranger category were scenarios like two teens met up at a local house party, had not known each other prior, the night was going the way it was going, left together of their own free accord, and the night took an awful turn. That individual would fall into the stranger category. But what we tend to think about more as family and as community of strangers is the person that's lurking just beyond our awareness, just out of our sight, who has ill intent and who is out there actively pursuing. And fortunately, that group falls into a lower category yet, around 3%. Now that's cold comfort, I'm well aware. But as you're thinking about how to apply this information and how to apply your resources and tools most effectively, know that the vast majority of those who present the most imminent potential risk or harm are those who build and establish relationships. And so I really want to focus our tools and resources on that component, given that it is the broader, more likely situation. Other information I want to share with you as you're contemplating those safety plans is the age breakdowns of those who are harmed by this kind of conduct and behavior. And if you're like me, you take a look at this data and you see, okay, it's broken into thirds, but then very quickly you start to go, okay, I see that 2/3 of this group are children. And as you start to really look at the numbers on the side, you'll see the narrowest age range, 13 to 17, constitutes 33% of those harmed. That's staggering. That's 9% of the population. So it's worth unpacking what's going on here. So what we know is with children from 0 to 12 is that the adults and trusted caregivers and community members and providers are very much having a direct impact on those children. They get to vet and choose who comes into those kids' lives. And so we at the Department of Corrections, along with law enforcement, want to make sure we're giving the best resources to those critical adults for those children as they're coming up through those years. But then ultimately what goes on to happen when we hit those teenage years is the very thing we work so hard as a community to achieve and attain. And that is a safe environment where our children can grow and thrive. And when they get to those years, they can start to develop and express their own autonomy. And what this ultimately means is that our teens are out there forming relationships with people outside of the watchful gaze of their trusted adult support network. And so what we've found through our research and data and studies and communication with victim advocacy groups and so on is that we really have gotten away from the old model of the talk, where we pull our teen aside at that critical age as parents and we say, okay, it's time to pull back the curtain a little, to remove the veil enough, to show them that the world may not be as safe as it had been made to be for them when they were younger. And now often what we find as parents, if we use that model, is that we usually get rebuked. Our kids will tell us how overreacting we are and how unaware we are of how safe their world is. And so what we find is the model of a lot of little talks all the way up and through, from the very young ages all the way up and through into early adulthood, that build on one another, not to overload our children because we don't want to create fear. And we know one thing really well, is that scared kids do not equal safe kids. And I would argue the same can be said for communities. So it's about age-appropriate information all the way up and through. And I will provide you some information and resources on how to have those important critical conversations going forward so that our kids, when they get to those critical teenage years, have a toolbox of skills built in so that they can deal with those situations or scenarios that may arise when we, the trusted adults, can no longer be there directly to help them out. So with this information that I've provided to you, I'm going to switch gears. We're going to talk about the man you're here to learn about today. I want you to take it and use it as an overlay. See where things that we've discussed may align and see where they may diverge. This is Bradley Edwards. I want to speak really quickly about photos. Photos are updated on average every 12 months, so yearly, or should the individual registrant significantly change or modify their appearance. If you happen to notice Mr. Edwards in the community and you see that he has modified or changed his appearance in such a way that he no longer looks like this photograph, you can certainly notify either law enforcement or his agent or both. And they will go out and obtain updated photos and get them onto the Predatory Offender Registry, where I will get them and make sure they're on the web. So for as long as this man is subject to broad public notification, you will always have an accurate photographic depiction of him. These are Mr. Edwards' vitals. He's currently 25 years of age, and he will be residing at the 600 block of West Main Street here in Marshall. Now, often in meetings like this, one of the questions that will come up is, Brad, can you tell us where he lives? It would give us a great deal of comfort if we knew what house he was in. And because of what we talked about earlier, you know that that specific address is private data. But with the proximal address, we can achieve quite a bit. With a proximal address, we can assure that those within that exact area, that neighborhood, are going to be aware of Mr. Edwards. They're going to see him as he comes and goes. And that information will be shared and communicated amongst neighbors. And that's just fine. But what we don't want is to have some vigilante scenario where someone who's well outside the Marshall community, who has no stake in the hard work you've put into creating a safe environment for your families to grow and thrive in, comes in to exact some vigilante revenge scenario that does nothing to mitigate risk or eliminate harm and only serves to add to the community's destabilization and harm. We don't want that. And so this is why the proximal addresses are utilized. This is Mr. Edwards' registrable offense history. This is on the fact sheet that's been made available to you. So I want to get right into the information about what got him placed on the registry. Know that this is not an exhaustive criminal history. This is what got him placed on the registry and subjects him to this type of notification. His criminal history is available to you online in the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's criminal history search. In 2013, Mr. Edwards was convicted of criminal sexual conduct, third degree, in Redwood County for a 2012 offense. At the time of the offense in 2012, the victim was a 13-year-old female, and Mr. Edwards at the time was a 17-year-old male. He knew this victim. They had met and established a relationship. Mr. Edwards utilized attention and affection to ultimately gain and exploit unmonitored access to this young female. When things went sideways, after he had gotten her away from those caring, trusting adults, he did use manipulation, force, and coercion to maintain control of that situation. And for his crime, he was given or assigned a 36-month commit to the prisons with a 5-year conditional release under EJJ. So there's a couple things to unpack here, because one of the questions that will often come up in meetings like this is, Brad, why does somebody who engages in or commits harm like this get to come out? And the answer lies within some of this information here, is in determinate sentencing. And so prior to determinate sentencing, back in the early 80s and prior, we had a system of parole. And the way that would ultimately work with these high-profile cases that were broadly socially distasteful was that when these individuals would come before the parole board, it was often very difficult for them to be granted release under really any circumstance. Now, often upon hearing that, the community very much will nod their head and say, thank you, Brad, that's just fine by us. But ultimately what was happening was that these individuals would then stay in the institution throughout the duration of their time, and they would expire, and on that expiration date would be walked to the gates of the prison and told, don't come back. And our recidivism rates reflected how ineffective that was. Through this different model that's been around now for some time, determinate sentencing, we've found that it really does create a much more nuanced impact on recidivism rates in a very positive way. So the way this system works is that you, for the severity of your crime and your criminal history, receive a presumptive disposition, a presumptive commit or stay to either the court or the community. And this one was 36 months. It's broken into months because 2/3 by law will be served in the prison if you go to prison, if you cross the threshold, and 1/3 will be served in the community under the watchful eyes of a supervising agent. This works to implement those skills and tools that they're receiving in the institution through therapy, treatment, counseling, and so on, and bring it to bear in the community with that agent keeping a watchful eye, making sure that they're adhering to those tools and implementing them effectively, thereby reducing risk. And you'll see the 5-year conditional release on the end. This is unique to sex offenders. This is to extend that final third for 5 years. So he will have the benefit of that governing agent interaction to assist him further in implementing those skills effectively. Now, EJJ stands for that extended juvenile jurisdiction. So at this time, he was 18. At the time of sentencing, he was an adult. However, the crime occurred when he was a minor. And so he was granted by the court the opportunity to fall under the juvenile supervision model. And so initially, he ran through that process. However, unfortunately for him, he was having a very difficult time adjusting to supervision as a whole and following the rules. Mind you, it doesn't mean he went on to commit new sex offenses, but as you'll see, he did struggle with his conduct in general. And ultimately, he lost his EJJ. He was convicted and ultimately sentenced as an adult and ended up going to prison when they vacated that stay for the 36 months in 2017. And by then, it was a 10-year conditional release period. So it tacked on an additional 5 years. And we no longer have a 5-year conditional release period. It's all 10 years conditional release. So his prison chronology breaks down like this. He crossed the threshold in 2017 once he had his EJJ revoked and the court weary of his conduct and behavior and sentenced him to serve that time. And you'll see here that in July of 2018, at that 90-day mark, okay, and for my number counters, know that he also receives credit for time served. So if the numbers aren't jiving, know that there's a credit component in there. So the 30th of July, 2018, he's assessed and assigned a risk level of 2 and released into the community at that time, where he has been in the community since all the way up until March of 2020, where his release was revoked and he was returned to the institution for administrative accountability time. It's important to note that his revocation was not for new criminal conduct, at least not in that it was new sexual conduct. It was for noncompliance and for failing to follow through with those fundamental conditions and expectations that reduce risk. And every time an individual registrant, regardless of the risk assessment they have on them at the time, if they cross that threshold again, they are reassessed. The End of Confinement Review Committee reviews what brought them back and makes a determination if the risk level should be modified to enhance community awareness and notification. And you can see here that that is exactly what the ECRC determined. That based on the conduct and behavior of Mr. Edwards, it would be of greater benefit to have a broader amount of folks know who he is and what his history was. So he is now set for re-release into the community on the 20th, where he comes out to intensive supervised release, another component of the state's risk management system. So in summation of kind of what a supervision and registration looks like, know this, that Mr. Edwards at this point will remain on correctional supervision up and through December of 2028, so long as he abides by the terms and conditions set forth and does not engage in any new additional criminal conduct. He will be on the registry as a registered individual until 2030. So up until 2030, he will have to let law enforcement know where he lives, where he works, what he drives, and for as long as he remains a level 3, he will be subject to broad public notification, and you will know where he is as well. Now I'm going to switch over to my colleague with intensive supervised release to share with you some specific information about what supervision looks like for Mr. Edwards and how it'll work going forward.
Hello, I am Brett Serene, one of Mr. Edwards' supervising agents. I will be supervising him upon his release on August 20th. Upon his release, he's going to be placed on ISR Supervision, which stands for Intensive Supervised Release. That was created back in 1990 in the state of Minnesota, and its objective was to create agents to supervise the highest risk offenders released from prison. Our primary objective is public safety. And how do we do that? Well, we in part do that with compliance with his release conditions. He'll be released with a number of conditions, which is all public information. Anyone can access what his conditions are. So in hopes of getting him through and having him comply with his conditions, and the hopes are it'll increase public safety. One of our goals is also reintegration into the community. We know that if has secure housing, employment, supports in the community, he's going to be more successful, which in turn will help create public safety. So part of the release planning process, it's a collaborative effort by institution and staff and agents. So prior to him getting released, myself or my team of agents will speak with the facility, and we'll try and come up with a plan of where he's going to be released to where he'll be more successful. Mr. Edwards has ties to the community in Marshall, so that is why he's coming here. So prior to his release, we're trying to develop a plan to where he can go and develop that before his release. We want to put him in a place where he's going to be safe and stable and have a supportive environment like I talked about to reintegrate him into the community and in turn help increase public safety. He will be placed on GPS upon his release. That is a tool that we use to verify his whereabouts. We can also put exclusion zones of like schools, daycares, and stuff like that. We can put that into his GPS unit, and so making sure he's not going to places that could get him in trouble. So upon his release on that date, he'll be released to myself or one of the agents on our team. We'll go and physically pick him up from the prison, transport him to his approved residence, and continue supervision from that point on. And again, our goal is successful reentry into the community. And we also have, we make sure they know we have our job to do, make sure they're compliant with their conditions. In any way we can help them successfully reintegrate in the community, we'll do whatever we can at that time. ISR operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, 365 days a year. There's a team of 4 of us, like I had mentioned. One of us is always on call, one of us is always working. We'll be checking on him 7 days a week. Could be 2 in the afternoon, could be 2 in the morning, it all just depends. It's a highly structured type of programming. We are gonna know what he is doing 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. He'll have a schedule for the week in advance, so he will never be doing anything in a couple days that we wouldn't know what he was doing ahead of time. So there shouldn't be any issues if he wanted to go to a swimming pool or a park or something like that. Those are things we would catch ahead of time. And if that was something he did without our permission, there would be consequences for that. ISR does operate with a reduced caseload size. We have some traditional agents have 50 to 100 cases. We're down to 15 a person. And the reason we do that is so we can give them our time and attention and to try and help, again, increase public safety by doing that. Like I said, we have frequent face-to-face contacts. We'll be seeing them several times through the week. Could be, 3 or more times a week, just given the situation. All of our visits are random and unannounced. Again, we will stop by, and we have a schedule for him for the following week, so he should know, or we're gonna know where he's at every minute of every day. And then he's also required to do daily contact. We have a 800 number that he'll have to call in and check in every day with when he leaves his residence and when he returns. Our supervision team is Tony Esping, Robin Van Overbeck, myself, Brett Serene, and Agent Brian Roiger. And our supervisor is Kelly Blake. And on the bottom is our 800 number. So if there's any issue where you see Mr. Edwards doing something that you don't feel he should maybe doing, you can contact our 800 number. Otherwise, if it is an emergency, by all means, contact law enforcement. I just want to go some over the conditions that you might be interested in. He does have restrictions against contact with minors. So if you were to see him in the community having contact, that's something that should be reported immediately to law enforcement, or you can contact our 800 number.
All right, Brett, thank you very much. And as Brett said, too, always keep in mind your best and most direct resource for your questions is going to be your local law enforcement. The Marshall Police Department is committed to ensuring that you have the best resources available in implementing those safety plans. So if you see something with this individual or anyone, as your awareness has been broadened, that raises the hair on the back of your neck or causes you pause, you don't really know if this is okay or not, make sure you're reaching out to local law enforcement, remembering that they know of all those registered individuals in the community, even the ones that you and I don't get to know about directly. And so by making that initial contact and involving them early on, we may very well be helping them in inhibiting any future potential harm or getting help to someone who needs it critically. If you see anything in the community that's more of an imminent threat or concern with this individual or anyone, call 911. Get them involved quickly. They are here to help and will intervene. If you have questions about community policing, if you have questions about how the department works specifically with this unique population, certainly call the non-emergency number and reach out for more of that information as well. So for other resources, as you're thinking about those family safety plans, I really want to point out one. I know a lot of questions often will come up and say, Brad, well, how do I begin that process of having those critical, age-appropriate conversations? I've had concerned parents who will pull me aside at the end of meetings and say, my child is developmentally delayed or has anxiety or just some sort of underlying issue that may inhibit their ability to make sound choices. And I will steer them and you and anyone else to the JWRC, at least as an initial touchstone, to get more information about having those conversations in a healthy, appropriate, and effective way. So keep them in mind. And they are just the tip of the iceberg, but know that they are there for you to assist in this stuff. Other resources I want to share with you is your local victim services provider. The reality of a topic like this and what we know statistically is that someone viewing this will either have been directly impacted by this type of harm or conduct or have supported or known somebody who has been harmed. And conversations like this, despite our best efforts, have a way of stirring that up and triggering those old feelings, especially in times like these where our stresses are already running high. Please know who to reach out to. I want you to have this information readily available if you yourself or someone you know or love or care for may be struggling. Please reach out to them and utilize them as a resource. To put a bow on all the information I've thrown at you today, and thank you for bearing with me, we try to cram a lot of detail and data into a reasonable amount of time so as not to exhaust you. But if you take nothing else away from what we've shared today, please let it be this. From what we know from our data and research, and we know a lot, 90% of those who have engaged in this type of harm, sexual harm, and once they've gone through that full state risk management system, do not go on to reoffend in a same or similar fashion. 90% of those who engage in this kind of conduct and harm are known to the victim. They use that relationship to exploit that comfort that they create or that sense of safety that they create. Which means our awareness needs to be on that 90% of those engaging in this kind of harm they have not been previously convicted. They have not come through the system as known sex offenders. And that's why having that broad awareness is just so critical, because the highest risk predatory offender that's out there in the community today is the one we don't know about. So we want to create an environment where our children can report safely to us or their trusted adults, and that we know what to do if and when a report is made to us. How our teens communicate with us in this important and critical information, and getting it into the hands of law enforcement so that they can act upon it as quickly as possible to prevent further harm and intervene where it's most critical. Folks, it really does come down to the 2 R's. It is about that relationship component, that social proximity that those who mean to do harm establish and maintain is so much more telling than any geographical proximity ever could be. Often questions will come up in meetings like this. Brad, how is it that this individual can reside within such a distance from a place where children are known to congregate, be it a school, daycare, park, playground, gymnastics center, and so on? bike paths, you name it. And the reality is where their head hits the pillow at night is not where their risk is at its highest. It's where they spend those waking hours. And that's where all of us need to be broadly aware. Everyone in the community needs to be aware. Law enforcement is extremely capable and good at what they do. Supervision is also very capable and good at what they do. But neither of those entities can do it alone. It takes all of us working together and collaborating. You, the community, are a critical component of this risk management system. And your awareness of this topic and your knowing how to engage the systems that are available to you is just so critical. Some additional resources as you're gaining more information on this important topic. Again, just the tip of the iceberg, but to get you started. As you're looking into more resources, as you're coming across them, just be sure to vet them. Make sure they're from reputable sources, and share with anyone else you think may benefit. And lastly, as far as state resources go, I'd mentioned earlier on, if you're interested in finding out anyone in Minnesota's criminal history, you can do that on the Bureau of Criminal Apprehension's website. Now, I did say that they maintain the Predatory Offender Registry and that is for law enforcement purposes only. However, they do have a public criminal history search function that is for everyone. All you need is the individual's first name, last name, and date of birth. You go onto their site, you go to the criminal history search function, you enter that in, and you will see all of their convictions. And I would argue if you're a parent vetting someone coming into your child's life, be they a tutor, a coach, or whomever that you're going to grant contact to, you can utilize this as a tool. And I would say anyone unwilling to provide you with that first name, last name, and date of birth probably does not deserve to be on that short list for consideration. Other resources available are through the Department of Corrections website. All the information and data I've thrown at you today from those research studies I referenced are available for you in their pure form to review and scrutinize yourself. Don't take my word for it. By all means, go onto our website, pull up this data, and read it and draw your own conclusions. If you cannot find it, contact me. My number will be at the end of this presentation. I will help you get there. The Department of Corrections also maintains an offender locator. This is for any individual who is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Corrections, regardless of the crime, be it a sex offense or otherwise. If you're aware of an offense and you want to know what's going on with the individual, or you've been impacted by an offense directly and you know they went to prison, this would be your search tool. And then lastly, that public register and search, where I'd mentioned that all those registered predatory offenders who are subject to broad public notification are available for your review. That's where you can go find that 400 some that I referenced earlier. You can go on there, you can search by zip code, by city, by county, or you can search directly by name. Or you can leave all the search fields blank and say, show them all to me, and see all 400 and some. Use that as a tool as well. Now, typically in meetings like this, we like to turn it open to you, the community, for question and answer. But obviously, as the chief indicated, things are going to be a little different today. So we're going to address your questions and concerns in a modified format.
This is Sergeant Jason Bicey with the Marshall Police Department. I encourage anybody with questions or concerns to contact us at the Marshall Police Department at 507-537-7000. As Brad had said earlier, a well-informed community is a safer community. Thank you for watching.